Hello and welcome to Walking Through Second Corinthians. My name is Whit Sasser, preacher with the Appleton Church of Christ. And we're near the end of this, of course. There's only 13 chapters in Second Corinthians. I'm not sure that we'll finish today, but I call this episode 13, I believe, and it is in chapter 12. And so we'll see, but I don't think that I'll probably get that far. I don't have this planned in advance as to how far I will get each time. I'm letting the clock somewhat determine that. And so we'll see. Let me go ahead and quickly direct you in case you're wanting to follow along. It's in chapter 12, verse 11. Chapter 12, verse 11, where I will resume reading in just a few moments. And while you're doing that, if you wish, and or if you prefer to listen to me, read aloud here in a moment, that's fine too. But either way, let me just take a moment to remind you of what was said last time. And I do recall saying last time, in fact, as I was checking into the video here to get ready, I saw that I had said, as I did last time, that I might comment a little because it was quickly dealt with at the end of the last episode. And I said something about I might return to it or say a little more about it before going on, and I'd like to do that. I won't read it again, but in the verses just before verse 11, where we'll start, in other words, in verses 7 through 10, I think, in verses 7 through 10, the Apostle Paul there mentions how he had a thorn in the flesh that he had begged the Lord 3 times to take away. Reminds me a little bit of the Lord asking God in the Garden of Gethsemane to take this cup from me. Some of you may know that story. But anyway, here Paul begs the one who could remove the thorn to do so, and what figuratively the thorn represents is speculative, and there are some good thoughts for some of those speculations. I'm not saying there's no grounds for thinking as people do. I'm just saying I don't think it can be proven beyond doubt that we know for sure. It would appear to be, though, something physical because he calls it a thorn in the flesh. And he does believe God could remove it, otherwise why ask? And so, anyway, I said I won't get into speculating about what I think it is, and I'm not sure that I have a strong speculation anyway. But the Lord basically says no. Now, he may not come right out and say, Paul, no, but it amounts to a no response. And the reasoning that God gives is because of your great, the great revelations you've received. Some think that might be talking about the number of New Testament epistles or revelations that became epistles and books of the Bible. However, and whatever that means, Paul the Apostle was blessed with many revelations. In fact, he even talks about knowing someone, maybe himself. He's speaking possibly anonymously of himself, caught up into the third heaven, hearing things that should not be uttered. And so all of that could go to his head, if I might use a sort of a modern jargon expression. And God's not going to let it go to his head, or at least doesn't want it to. And one of the ways that is defeated is to have a physical thorn, if you will, that remains. And God says, and you're strong when you depend on me more to make it through the day or make it through that ordeal of dealing with the thorn. And so let me close with this. He says, I will read verse 10. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. And so he changes his thought about it to be in line with how God is using it, and wants to be in line with the Lord's thinking along these lines. Okay, I think that's maybe even more than I was going to say, but let's pick up with verse 11. I've become a fool in boasting. You've compelled me, for I ought to have been commended by you. For in nothing was I behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. Truly the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all perseverance, in signs and wonders and mighty mighty deeds. For what is it in which you were inferior to other churches, except that I myself was not burdensome to you? Forgive me this wrong. I I still think Paul is being a bit sarcastic sometimes. Forgive me this wrong. He doesn't think he did wrong, and he doesn't, in one sense, regret it, except for how it turned out. But he basically says, "I'd do it again." I'm using my own way of referring to it or talking of it. And but anyway, is that the only thing that I'm weak in, that I didn't charge you for my services or take from you physical wages for my work that I did with you, which I have a right, Paul? I'm speaking as if I'm Paul. I have a right to take that. God has made it a right to those who preach the gospel to be supported of the gospel. And so I'm not stepping out of line if I were to take it, but I chose not to for some, and I've talked about it before, for some reasons, for uh, expediency, we'd say. Okay, back to verse 11 and how I started, or how he started by saying, "You're making me act foolish," and I don't think he literally means you're making me, but because of the way you're acting, you're making me do what I definitely don't prefer to do. Talking about myself, talking about my accomplishments, talking about me being an apostle. And by the way, let me just stop myself right there and say that he even probably had some that did not even regard his apostleship. Forget about him as a preacher and as a person. They didn't even maybe regard him in a way that they should, as an apostle. And he makes the claim, "I'm not, one bit behind any of the chiefest apostles that you might regard," and whomever that might be. And I've proven it. When I say I've proven it, I mean it's been proven by the signs that he did. He did miraculous things. He doesn't name them, but he just indicates truly the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you. And so there's no way that they should not be having a very commendable view of the Apostle Paul, but they are. And because they are, it really puts him in a difficult place. He loves and cares for them so much, he doesn't want to just cast them off. Well, okay, be that way. And he just wants nothing to do with them. He just has too much love for them and care for them to do that. Okay, verse number 14. "Now for the third time I'm ready to come to you." By the way, I'll just stop myself here. Some have indicated that there is a third epistle, meaning we have 1st and 2nd Corinthians that he 3 times has written and so forth. Well, here he talks about 3 times. This will be the third time that he's going to be there. Anyway, "For the third time I'm ready to come to you, and I'll not be burdensome to you, for I do not seek yours, but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I'm loved. But be that as it may, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. Did I take advantage of you by any of those whom I sent to you? I urged Titus and sent our brother with him. Did Titus take advantage of you? Did we not walk in the same spirit? Did we not walk in the same steps? Again, do you think that we excuse ourselves to you? We speak before God in Christ, but we do all things, beloved, for your edification. For I fear, lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I wish, and that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish, lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults, lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and I shall mourn for many who have sinned before and have not repented of the uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness which they have practiced." I'm going to let that suffice. I'll make a few comments, but let that be the ending of the reading for today. We'll pick up, God willing, next time in chapter 13, but that's the end of chapter 12. Okay, just to go back and look at a little of this before I finish for this episode of walking through 2nd Corinthians. He's, as I said before, and I'm saying or repeating myself, he's not regretting having not charged them for his services. He really, in fact, he's basically saying, "I'll do it again." And it's not just stubbornness, it's just I have no second thoughts about what motivated me to do that. And I don't want to be that I'm seen in any way to be after what you have. I'll just call it your money. I'm after your money rather than you. There were some maybe that were paid, and nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the Bible also alludes to those who did so for that purpose, meaning the motivating force behind it was filthy lucre, the old King James Bible calls it, or godliness is a means of gain, Paul calls it in another place. Yeah, there's going to be that. It's nothing new. Judas was stealing out of the bag at least some of the time, as we'd call him a treasurer for Jesus when he was on earth. So I mean that kind of thing happens, regrettably, but that kind of thing happens, and Paul just didn't want to have anything to do with that. I don't. In fact, he said I took wages from other churches, so he was not opposed to ever being paid for his services. But in the Corinthian case, he chose to go that route, and he said, "I'll do it again when I'm there next time. I'm not going to be asking for support from you because of the services that I'm rendering to you." And then I won't go into this, but he mentions others that have been sent by me. Have they been any different? They haven't, and I'll just let that be the comment that he makes on that in verses 17, 18, 19 along in there. And then finally, and this may be a little bit of an extended finally, he talks about making an appeal that hopefully things get turned around, turned to the better before he gets there, so that and this, he doesn't say it again, but he said it before. I would hope when we come together, it'd be a wonderful time. I'm using my own words. It'd be a great time rather than just constantly dealing with problems. And he mentions two general categories. First of all, he talks about, and I'm not going to read it all, but in verse 20, he talks about contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, and so forth. I think he speculates, Paul does, that could be a lot of what goes on when he's there. And boy, would that ever ruin, we'd say, a good get together, a good time of fellowship, a good time of community get together of Christians, Paul and maybe others with the Corinthians, of course. Wouldn't it be nicer? Well, of course, it'd be nicer if we don't have that tenseness, that friction that's between brethren. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Hopefully that could somehow get cleared up, whatever it is that might cause that kind of thing, before he gets there. And then I won't say switches, but he deals with something much different when he says in 21, also me crying, mourning, being so saddened to know that people have, in the church, have not repented of uncleanness, fornication, lewdness, and the like. We know from 1 Corinthians 5 of a fornicator in the congregation. I won't go back and read or even reference it other than to say that he has dealt with that in 1 Corinthians 5. But it does not appear to be that one person in 1 Corinthians 5 was the only person, at least the way it's worded here. He says, for many who have sinned, and he includes in that fornication, and have not repented of it. So don't know how many others, but it was seemingly, at least at this time, I don't know about all the way back to 1 Corinthians 5, but at this time there were others. It was not just one. And there's a great possibility, I think, that brother, 1 Corinthians 5, repented. He talks about in 2 Corinthians, that's this book that we're walking through, chapter 2, I believe it is, talks about, without naming anybody or even describing specifically a sin involved, a repentance that took place. And he's actually pleading with the brethren to take him back gladly and not make him overcome with sorrow that now brethren won't accept me and receive me once I've repented. You can go back to 2 Corinthians 2 if you want to read about that. So if that be the case, and he doesn't say that it is, but if that be the case that it was the brother mentioned in 1 Corinthians 5 that had that had repented, so I guess all I'm saying is if he's talking here about people that have many that have not repented of fornication and other sinful things listed there, wow, I don't know what's happened, but it seems to be more than one person. Okay. Any other thought that I have that comes to mind? I guess not. So let me just stop here then. And God willing, we'll pick up with chapter 13, the Lord willing, next time. Thank you.